Islam in France. Islam is one of the various religions in France. Although Muslims have existed in France for a long time, both mainland France and its residential areas outside Europe. Mass Muslim immigration to France in the 20th and 21st centuries has made this country one of the countries with the largest Muslim community in Europe. The growth of Islam in France was also driven by the native population converting to Islam. But Muslims in France are not allowed to wear headscarves according to laws issued by the government. Statistics. There are many versions regarding the number of Muslims in France. According to the U.S. Department of State, in 2006 there were about 10% Muslims in France, whereas a poll conducted a year later showed it was 3% of the national population. A book published by the American Central Intelligence Agency, CIA World Factbook, states there is approximately 5 to 10% of the Muslim population in France. In 2000, the French Ministry of the Interior estimated that there were 4.1 million people born into Islamic families, and about 40,000 who converted. There are also estimates that the number of Muslims in France was 7 million in 2009. History. The entry of Islam into France began with the arrival of Islam in Andalus. Quickly, the entire Iberian Peninsula was conquered by the Muslims. Approximately 20 years after 711 AD, or 92 AH, Abdurrahman al-Ghafiqi began to move towards the Pyrenees, occupying Septimania and Aquitaine. Their position was already close to that of Paris, when Tours and Poitiers had been occupied. The rapid development of Islam in France. The development of Islam in France in general and Paris is going quite well. This can be seen from the passion of the Parisian Muslim community in filling the Grand Mosque of Paris, namely the Grande Mosquée de Paris, when performing Friday prayers. As in Hadi Gunawan's direct report from Paris, the Grande Mosquée de Paris, which can accommodate 300 worshippers, was very crowded. It is believed that a similar situation will be found in a number of mosques spread throughout Paris. In the last few years at least, around 2,400 mosques have been built in the city known for its Eiffel Tower. Looking at the numbers, you could say that it is quite a lot for a country whose majority is secular. That is, they don't really believe in the existence of God. As is known, France itself is currently holding the biggest football party in Europe, namely the 2016 European Cup. The event itself coincides with the Muslim holy month, Ramadan. The development of Islam in France, history, population, and Islamophobia. France is one of the countries with the largest Muslim population in Europe. Islam has entered France since the 8th century AD. The following is the development of Islam there, from history to the challenges of Islamophobia in France. The expansion of Islamic Dawah reached France since the rule of the Umayyad dynasty in the 8th century, led by Commander Abdurrahman al-Ghafiqi through the Pyrenees Mountains. During that time, Islamic troops occupied the Septimania area. The arrival of Islam in France could not be separated from the fall of Andalusia, now Spain, into the hands of Arab rulers. Since then, the Umayyad dynasty expanded its expansion to France. Slowly, Abdurrahman al-Ghafiqi also took control of the Poitiers and Tours areas, near the city of Paris. This is what later became the forerunner of Islamic settlements in the region. The Muslim population in France is increasingly growing after World War I and II through Muslim immigrants who migrated to France. Many of them brought their respective families to form Muslim colonies in French territory. Muslim population in France. The specific number of Muslims in France is difficult to know, because since 1968, the French government has eliminated religious category information on their identity cards. After all, France is a secular country that separates religious affairs from state affairs. Thus, religion is seen as a private matter, and there is no state interference in the personal matters of its citizens. However, based on population data estimates, the number of Muslims in France in 2022 will be around 5.7 million residents, around 8.80% of the total population of France. The Muslim population is seen as the largest on the European continent. The Pew Research think tank wrote down a number of reasons for the fairly rapid development of Islam in France. Among the reasons is that many Muslim immigrants are seeking asylum or livelihood in France. In addition, most of the Muslim population in France is young and productive. They also have more children than local residents. Islamophobia in France. Causes and challenges. The challenge of Islamophobia in France cannot be separated from internal conflicts and the influence of Islamic bias among its population. Quoted from the Journal of Comparative Study of Religions, among the reasons for the presence of Islamophobia in France is that Islam is accused of being the cause of the economic recession in France and the stigma of terrorism after the 9/11 incident in America. Firstly, during World War I and II, the French government needed laborers to rebuild their country, which was ravaged by war. To overcome this problem, they brought in Muslim immigrants and workers from Morocco and Africa. The reason is that these migrant workers can be paid cheaply so that they can reduce the costs of developing the French region. As the number of Muslim immigrants in France increased, they also founded various places of worship and other Islamic organizations, such as France Plus, Generation Egalite, and Generation Beur. These Islamic organizations then held various religious activities and quite massive theological discussions. They also preached to the French people. This is quite disturbing for the government because Islam is seen as incompatible with the secular values adhered to by France. The stigma against Muslims worsened when Western Europe experienced an economic crisis in the 1970s. Due to the economic recession, many Muslim immigrants were unemployed and lost their jobs. The image of Islam as a foreign entity, plus Muslims who are unproductive, unemployed, appears to be a negative image for the French population. Even if they get a decent job, these immigrants are considered usurpers of jobs that, should be filled by local people. Second, the tragedy of 11 September 2001, when terrorist attacks targeted the World Trade Center, WTC. Building in the United States further tarnished the image of Islam. Americans and Europeans label Islam as a terrorist religion. The stereotype of Islam as a barbaric and irrational religion reached France after 11/2001. There is an association that Muslims are a terrorist group, which gives rise to discrimination and harassment against Muslims, as stated by Petsi Jesse Ismoyo in Journal Kakrawala. France is one of the countries that strongly opposes Islam. On April 11, 2011, France passed the law La Loi contre la Burqa, which prohibits Muslim women from wearing burqas in public places. In 2020, French President Emmanuel Macron issued the Charter of Republican Values Regulation, which rejected Islam as a political value. Macron feels that Islam is a threat to French values of secularism. The regulations also limit homeschooling for French Muslims, give children from Muslim families identification numbers, and prohibit sharing personal information with others.